Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I'm Joris van Enta, and I welcome you to this session of the Resilience for the Urban Poor Forum 2021. This session, main session number 2, about climate and disaster resilience at community level, brings a number of speakers together looking at how to build resilience for urban poor, particularly at the community level. We have some really exciting speakers. I come to you from Indonesia, where I'm a senior urban development specialist with the Asian Development Bank, and where we've been trying to work with communities indeed to strengthen resilience. The session today really looks at, as I said earlier, building resilience at community level, and to see to what extent actions can be taken at the household and city and local level, local government levels, to ensure impacts are sustainable. Now, we need to really look at the community infrastructure, such as basic services, to reduce the impact of climate and disaster risks. But we also need to look a bit broader. So community livelihood, skills development, protection of natural resources, and financing of community-led actions. So we really hope that this session will help us to zoom into some of the challenges and lessons learned of implementing community level resilience building activities. And for that, we have some really great speakers, which we are very excited about to join us. The flow is that we will start with one 15-minute PowerPoint presentation, which will follow by a brief Q&A. And then we have a panel discussion of about 25 minutes. And then finally, another 10 minutes for Q&A. Now, a number of housekeeping rules. There is a Q&A box, so please make use of that generously. That always makes it exciting if we get questions and comments from you there. We have also a chat box, a feedback tab, and there's also going to be poll questions, which we are hoping you will participate in. We then have also what you will see is in the activity feed on the left-hand side of the screen, there will be the presentations later will be uploaded there. We don't have too many presentations. Actually, some of the speakers have prepared presentation, but to keep it interactive, rather than showing you those presentations, we'll be posting that into the library. So with that, I very much welcome you to participate in the first poll questions for the audience, which is hopefully coming on your screen at the moment. That particular poll question looks at what do you think is the most common climate and disaster risk related issue in urban poor communities that requires community level interventions. So please take some time to look at the questions as well as the potential answers which are in front of you. So go to the poll question tab on the right side of the screen, and there is no wrong answer. We just want to get a feeling of what's the appreciation with our audience of this particular question. Okay, now I hope that the results can be shown to me as well. Wait, let me make this a bit bigger here. Okay. Can we, yes, I see some questions of feedback coming in, where the lack of infrastructure such as drainage that exacerbates flooding, including poor access to basic services such as clean water and sanitation, seems to be scoring very high. So let me give you 10 more seconds. All right.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So it's nice to be here, and thank you to the organizing team for inviting me to this event. So in my presentation, I will share the issues and challenges and the emerging lessons from ADB Technical Assistance 9329 in promoting urban climate change resilience in selected Asian cities, particularly the community-led resilience projects. This project is considered the biggest contract awarded by ADB to a civil society organization, which is Oxfam. It is funded by the Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund of the ADB, with financing partners FCDO, Rockefeller Foundation, and the Swiss government. It's a regional TA, meaning it's implemented in 8 cities, communities in Bangladesh, Pakistan, and the Philippines. Oxfam is the main project implementer, but as you can see in the slide, we are partnering with local civil society organizations in these communities. So the main goal of the project is promote resilience building through community empowerment. It provides voice, agency, and inclusive participation of poor and vulnerable groups in climate adaptation planning and investment programming. So these initiatives integrate climate scenarios and resilience thinking in planning and programming at the community level. So since this is a pilot project, this is a learning project, and it aims to promote community-led approach in ADB operations, as well as to developing member countries and cities in Asia and the Pacific. So before I begin, please allow me to promote the first knowledge product publication of the project. So we can share this link to this document with everyone. So we call this a practical guide to community-led urban resilience planning. This presents some of the issues and challenges of urban resilience planning and actions, and how do we innovate traditional processes to ensure climate adaptation actions reflect the aspirations of the urban poor. So this publication includes a practical guide to simple climate risk and vulnerability assessment, highlighting the risks that affect local communities and how this risk affects the lives and livelihoods of the poor and marginalized groups. It builds on local knowledge and integrates top-down information with bottom-up experience and knowledge. So one of the important aspects of this guide is to create a multi-stakeholder engagement platform between communities and community members and local governments. That's something that's usually missing in traditional urban planning procedure. And in this guide, we are promoting the urban poor communities not just as beneficiaries, but as informed participants at the center of resilience planning. So this is a first of 3-part series on urban community resilience planning and community-led project implementation. So the opening session yesterday sets the scene for the whole forum. As we know, cities are rapidly growing, the rate of climate change is accelerating, and the poor and marginalized people and groups are most affected by impacts of climate change and disasters. So this presents huge challenge to traditional way we plan our towns and cities, because this becomes a compound situation where poor communities must move out of poverty and continue to survive and thrive in the face of climate change. Without this focus, climate change and disasters will continue to undermine efforts to reduce poverty and inequality. So in the guidebook, we identified 4 major challenges if we use business as usual traditional urban planning in action. The first part is that top-down approaches often exclude urban poor communities. So for example, the use of official census data. The official census information used by traditional urban planning procedures, they exclude minority groups and certain informal groups that needs to be incorporated. And then there are several other examples of government restrictions on providing urban services and infrastructure in informal settlements. The list is long. We need to innovate. We don't need to change, but we need to innovate on how we approach our urban planning process. And then the second the second challenge is that poverty and inequality are built in and perpetuated by systems and norms over time. So for example, poor communities continue to spiral down to poverty because of existing systems and norms. We know of the case of higher electricity bills and water supply distribution costs in poor areas. So why do poor people pay more than others? And this continues to drive poor people further deeper into poverty. And then there's examples of uneducated workers. They cannot get into formal employment, which leads to further marginalization. And then the case of women and girls are also often disadvantaged in many areas. So in Oxfam reports in other projects, even, for example, the most well-meaning gender-neutral programs inviting equal numbers of male and female participants, there are underlying issues preventing female participation in these programs. So due to the existing social norms, women often lose time and opportunities to engage in economic enterprise. They often cannot access financial and livelihood support, among many others. So these norms continue to serve as barriers for the poor, for women, and for women's economic empowerment. The third item is the lack of access to decision-making, which further drives urban poverty and inequality and exclusion. So most decision makers and planners, they come from a different segment of society, and their experience are totally different from the poor and vulnerable communities. They have a different life experiences, and they see the world and climate change problems differently. So the point here is representation is very crucial. We need to give voice, agency, and access to decision-making to underrepresented groups that will provide a better framing of the problem and yield more appropriate solutions to their priority concerns. And then the fourth point, there's weak institutional capacities for multi-level, multi-sectoral planning. As we know, traditional planning process is often inflexible. We often comply with prescribed procedures, and there's no flexibility to innovate, to incorporate those that are missing in the planning information that we need. In this way, the project is trying to incorporate an innovation in the traditional way that we plan our cities. The project conducted an extensive process of community preparation, mobilization, capacity building to inform and empower them in resilience planning process. So we organized a community stakeholder group where community members meet and discuss with local government counterparts, and city officials and technical experts can hear their experience and priorities. Communities are engaged in all steps of the community-led project, from the risk and vulnerability assessment, identification of priority resilience problem and solutions, project design, feasibility study, procurement, construction monitoring, operations and maintenance, and later on the sustained operation of their community-led project. So if you look at this slide, this is an extensive process. The usual project cycle starts here. So that means from project preparation to community engagement, empowerment, and making sure that the community leads this process. It's a very extensive process. And that's often a challenge for most government agencies and even financing institutions. But later on, we will try to capture the benefits of this extensive process. Is there a value add, or is it the same? The result will be the same. So that's what we try to collect and consolidate by the end of the project. So the project is aligned with ADB's guiding principles of urban resilience. There is a need to combine hard and soft measures, taking a holistic approach in promoting urban resilience at the community level, where improvement of community capacities, networks, and behaviors are important critical elements, along with physical infrastructure systems during disruptions. So this process builds on and improves community knowledge and capacity to participate, collaborate, and negotiate in planning and programming. It also ensures project sustainability because the community remains there. And then the community has an important role in the management, operation, and maintenance of these projects. So in this project, we also integrate enterprise development, livelihoods promotion, and try to promote women's economic empowerment wherever possible. So these are examples. I will not cover all these examples, but this is a summary table of the resilience issues and community-led resilience projects that were identified by the community. So this might seem like a traditional project, but it's not. Maybe I'll pick up some of the 2 examples that I will be sharing later. So the community themselves identify the priority resilience issues that are most important to them, and they come up with the solutions that they feel are more appropriate. So there comes a time when we consulted them and they say, this doesn't usually work. We already had this in the past. That's where the local knowledge is very important. So for example, in the case of Haniway, one of the community is called Barangay San Julian in the Philippines. The issue is water scarcity. But there's a water companies providing water in the whole town. But the community is not the priority for providing enough sufficient water. So the community says there needs to be some change that needs to happen because we are suffering from this water shortage, especially in the dry months, 6 months of the year. So what they recommend is, on top of the water company service, there needs to be a community managed level 3 water supply system for the community and a water harvesting facility during the rainy season. So this seems to be a standard project, but the community themselves identify, this is not downloaded projects from higher local governments to the community. The community identifies the problem and they also come up with the solutions to these problems. So let me go to 2 examples that we have. We already completed the civil works construction in these 2 communities. This is in Barangay San Julian, Haniway, Iloilo in Central Philippines. The community of San Julian, maybe just a background, experiences unique weather extremes, persistent drought and water scarcity issues for 6 months during the dry season and heavy rainfall leading to flooding in the rainy season. There is, as I mentioned, there is a water company in the town, but it provides inadequate water supply, poor water service. And about 43% of the community, mostly poor households, are unconnected. They use deep wells, springs, water vendors, water rationing. So the cost of their water every month is double than the formal settlements and the rest of the city. It leads them to higher costs of water, paying for water rationing and separate drinking water. And the lack of reliable water supply affects the overall growth and development of the community, health and sanitation issues, and overall inconvenience to the residents. And according to the climate change projections of PAG-ASA, this is expected to exacerbate water problem of the community because according to the projection, there will be longer dry months for this area of the Philippines. And then in rainy season, there will be higher precipitation levels during the wet season. So the community proposed to establish a community-managed water supply distribution system that provides water to poor unconnected households. They added a community rainwater harvesting system that will collect rainwater during rainy season through a network of feeder RUPs and will store the water in an underground cistern for future use. So this combined community-operated system of water collection and water supply distribution will enhance the water security, especially in summer months, and address the main resilience issue of the community. So at this point, as you can see the photos, these are the construction photos of the water supply system. It's now 100% complete. So we will now be rolling out the capacity development for the operations and maintenance, and there will be a cooperative that will manage the system from the community. And then this example from the strawberry fields of Barangay Betag, La Trinidad, Benguet. Barangay Betag is a fertile valley in the municipality of La Trinidad, where the strawberry fields are located. The farmers rent plots of gardens to produce high-value vegetables and strawberries. If you look at the flood map, it's high risk and susceptible to high flood inundations, especially during the monsoon and typhoon season. The community and their livelihoods are highly vulnerable to this severe flooding. In the community resilience planning, they proposed a project to improve the flood drainage system through the construction of three larger than usual reinforced box culverts in 3 strategic points of the community. So this will increase the discharge capacity of floodwater out of the strawberry fields. So the design is larger by government standards and takes into account the projected increase in rainfall and flood volume levels for the next 50 years. And true enough, this year it was tested twice. There were 2 typhoons and monsoon episodes that happened this year. There were reports of flooding. There were still reports of flooding, but it subsided very quickly within an hour. So the local government and the community was very thankful to this intervention. And the operations and maintenance, the silt dredging, and making sure that everything will be operated sustainably will now be handed over to the local community and the local government. So one of the benefits, one of the interesting outcomes that we have learned from the project is that there is a local counterpart contribution invested by the community and the city. The total local counterpart contribution, if you look here, is now almost exceeds the ADB investment cost, which means there is local funding internally for resilience projects. At the beginning, it was made clear that the TA can support infrastructure investment, capacity development, and design support, but there are items that cannot be covered in this grant. For example, the purchase of land, operation and maintenance costs, and others. The community themselves understood that for the project to materialize, they need to contribute with these requirements. The city government contributed land and technical support for the project. In Malay, for example, there is no available suitable land for their evacuation center. The municipal government purchased the land in a safe zone of the community. And then in Faridpur, if you look here, the newly elected mayor who took office early this year has seen the value of the construction of the community green park. The land was estimated to be to cost around $1 million US. This is on top of the additional construction cost, almost equal to the ADB UCRTF infrastructure costs that ADB will be investing. So if you look at this table, this is value for money in terms of financial standpoint and from the project outcome standpoint, where community was influenced to contribute to invest in resilience projects. And then this is my final slides. We are still capturing some of the lessons from the project, and we hope to share these lessons in the future. What we have seen is that community-led approach is not the choice approach for most urban planning projects because of inherent challenges of community-level engagement. So for example, there are lack of data at the community level, lack of technical capacities. It requires longer time and outreach in preparing communities. And there are some barriers that needs to be addressed. But at the same time, we have this proof that the benefits of community-led approach far outweigh these challenges. For example, providing voice and agency for the poor and vulnerable groups in itself is one benefit that links to the other benefits, like better framing of resilience problems and more appropriate solutions will be identified. And it also strengthens community ownership and enhances project sustainability. And on top of this civil works infrastructure, the community is now more, that have the capacity for tackling present and future risk, because these are not just the issues that they will be facing now and in the future. There will be other problems, but now they know how to tackle this risk and how to engage and collaborate with internal and external institutions in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joris, over to you.
Thank you very much, Marina. And if you could go back on the slide, because that's something where I really want to pick up on. And apologies, I got logged off so I wasn't able to formally introduce you. But I wanted to ask a question related to these emerging lessons from the project. You are very clear on the benefits. But of course, it's all about finding the entry points and showing people how the opportunities and how the challenges related to community participation can be addressed. So one of the elements is indeed it's time consuming, as you said, and it's as a result of that it's quite expensive. Now, how can these have you found ways to reduce these costs, or are there ways to, it sounds a bit silly maybe, but to cut corners to make it a bit more, scalable? Please, love to hear from you.
All right. The good thing is the value of that extensive process can be seen as also in enhancing the urban planning procedure. So for example, there's lack of data. So if you look at the information that will be generated from the community themselves, especially the poor and those that are not incorporated in the census information, that in itself provides value add to this approach. So cutting corners, there might be some items, but we need to make sure that the community are informed and they are empowered, because otherwise they are intimidated by technical information and technical procedures. If in the future, I feel that could be shortened, that procedure can be shortened if they have undertaken these kinds of projects previously.
Yeah, thanks. Then there's a question on the Q&A platform, and I very much encourage others also to post questions, of course, which is on terminology. And the question relates to whether there's any significant differences between community-led and community-based. Are there any differences? And if so, what are these differences? Community-led versus community-based approaches, is it the same, or if there's a difference? What in your opinion,
we don't usually dwell in these kinds of terminologies. What's important is the common understanding that there's leadership from the community is empowered. If you look at the whole program, it's called the community-led project, but some of the issues that were tackled by the communities are solid waste management, and we call the solutions as community-based solid waste management. So as long as the community are given the voice, agency, and decision-making power, it doesn't matter if it's community-led or community-based. The overall understanding is the community is empowered to lead and be given the decision-making in solving their issues.
Thanks for that, Marino. That's I think, we can have lengthy discussions about what it is exactly, but the spirit, the idea, the concept behind it of giving communities a voice seems to be the main message here. Thank you, Marina, for that. I would like now to turn to our panel, which consists of three very capable speakers. Which the first one is Tiffany Trang, who works with me as a human settlement expert with the ADB. And where she is leading a team of experts looking at preparing our livable settlements investment project here in Indonesia. Then the next panelist is Pak Nurul. Pak Nurul stepped in at the last moment for Ibu Virgi, who is Director of Housing and Settlements at the Ministry of National Development Planning, or Bappenas in Indonesia. But Pak Nurul is really the one within that directorate looking at informal settlements, low-income settlements. And then last but not least, it's Ana Maria Karaos, who is a faculty member of the Ateneo de Manila University and Associate Director of the John J. Carroll Institute on Church and Social Studies, which is an NGO in the Philippines specializing in advocacy-oriented research on issues affecting the vulnerable groups, including the urban poor. We have a number of questions for you, and the way I would like to do this is to start first with Tiffany, and to turn this question then to the other two panelists, Pak Nurul and Ibu and Ms. Anna. And the first question is indeed, what have been your experience, Tiffany, related to building climate and disaster resilience on urban poor through community level interventions? And to what extent has resilience considerations been integrated into that work? So if you have an example about that, that would be much appreciated. Thanks, Tiffany.
Thank you, Joris, for the introduction. Very pleased to be here today. So today I'll share some experiences with urban resilience and urban poverty in the context of slums in our work in Cirebon City, Indonesia. And And I'm going to actually try to connect and show you how how we try to integrate city level with community level policy and planning. And so should I expand on that, yours?
Please go ahead, please.
Okay, so our team was tasked with collecting and analyzing community level data on slum conditions to inform future investments in urban resilience. And previous studies on slum conditions in Tier 1 had two major limitations. First, they only had city level baseline data and weren't specific to each slum community. And then secondly, they mostly focused on physical infrastructure. And so in some ways that makes sense because slums in Indonesia are defined by housing and infrastructure poverty. So not necessarily monetary poverty, not necessarily land tenure or access to education, all the things and all forms of poverty that we are dimensions that we know are other forms of poverty. And so in conducting this urban resilience assessment, we tried to understand slums as a spatial overlap between urban informality and multidimensional poverty. And that allowed us to do that comprehensive assessment of resilience that we couldn't have done had we only been focusing on housing and infrastructure. And so part of that work, we did, I'll talk about three things, or highlight three things. So we first developed a multidimensional city analysis framework specific to Indonesia. And this covered 4 dimensions of the city. So built capital, such as its infrastructure, natural capital, so its climate, its natural hazards, land, air, water, resources, its human capital, so it's education, mental and physical well-being, food security, and then lastly, it's social capital. So assets of the city that are related to culture, community engagement, or civic engagement. And so this resulted in a citywide urban resilience assessment, but that included profiles for each slum community. And that included the types of livelihoods in those communities, the access to health, the preferred way to access health, preferred way to access education. And so with that framework, we try to make the city level and the community level sort of communicate with each other, connect those things. And another way we tried to do that is we engaged locally based experts to lead all of engagement and communication between us as ADB and us, and the local government as well as the communities. And that became especially important due to all the remote work that we were doing. And then lastly, I think this speaks to the multi-stakeholder kind of approach that Marino started highlighting, but we partnered with a research lab based in Singapore to conduct cross-sectoral spatial analyses for the slum data, which integrated community level slum data with other data sets. So projected sea level rise, flooding, drainage, and that had not been explored before, as far as we know. So, and then lastly, we partnered with an ADB initiative from Youth for Asia, or called Youth for Asia, to pilot youth-led research on urban resilience. So they actually recruited 21 local youth ambassadors from different socioeconomic backgrounds to conduct this youth vulnerability assessment, which included also climate resilience and climate vulnerabilities. I think that kind of encapsulates everything yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. So your focus has really been on collecting data, overlaying this data, making this data visible, and making sure that you're capturing the real situation in the various communities in Cirebon. Now, moving to Pak Nurul. So what has your experience been in building climate and disaster resilience in Indonesia through community level interventions? I know you are sitting at national government level in the planning agency, but how does the government of Indonesia look at enhancing community participation and making them more resilient? Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Joris. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I think it's interesting talking about two aspects. Today, the first we are talking about urban poor, and the second one we are talking about climate disaster resilience. This is not only widely discussed and researched in Indonesia. However, currently we are concerning on extreme poverty. People in poverty, they have to be resilient not only because of disaster, but every day. They have to survive every day because of the situation that face in every day because of their livelihood and housing and everything, especially in urban area. But yes, we have problem for urban people who are living in the not coastal area of Java due to land subsidence. The land subsidence kills their homes slowly, about 2 meters for around 20 years. So they have to rebuild their house because of the land subsidence. It's very significantly affect their house, such in Pekalongan and Semarang. Yeah, and then we are also in Indonesia, as we discussed before, we are facing the chronic urban slum. Yeah, because of we don't have good recipe for how to handle urbanization. Yeah, urbanization should boost our economic because of the agglomeration forces, but in the reality, the congestion factors is the barrier for us for optimum growth in Indonesia. Yeah, for example, because of the urban sprawl force the low-income people to live in the inappropriate place without basic infrastructures. Moreover, people who are living in slum area, we have like about 3.5 million urban households living in overcrowded housing, and 1 of 5 urban residents of Indonesia, they are living in the slum. So they have to struggling with the risk of tuberculosis. This is, I think, Indonesia has the high incidence of TBC, COVID yes in Jakarta, and mortality of infant, diarrhea, and I think in the past 10 years, we know that people who are living in the north of Jakarta, they have to pay water about 2 times of rich people in the Menteng in Jakarta. Government, we have to handle the access for the housing in our midterm development plan. In the 3 strategies, in demand strategies mostly related to the housing finance, how to provide housing finance for the low income and maybe the lower middle income, and in the supply, how to provide options that are suitable for various households in Indonesia. And the third one, how to strengthen the capacity of the community, the capacity of local government, the capacity of the private sector for providing adequate and affordable housing. And one of the most issue in Indonesia is building code. I think it's very relevant that we know in Indonesia we have tsunami, we had Palu earthquake and liquefaction, and also in Lombok, mostly because of the building code. Yeah, because we cannot avoid the earthquake, for example. Yeah, we have mostly 4 main program in housing subsidy, in provision of new housing, including development of public housing, housing improvement program, or we can call bedah rumah. And the third, we are promoting integrated slum upgrading. Yeah, we have. This is the main aspects in achieving cities wide without slum. Currently, we are concerning in housing provision and basic infrastructure. For the future, we are still dealing with land consolidation, land regularization. Yeah, we have a pilot project in the several area in Indonesia, in some cities, and how to ensure justice in spatial planning. Yeah, we know that, for example, in Tangerang, in Jakarta, it's about 65% of land is owned by big developers. They buy the land from the village people in the maybe 20 years ago with the lower price, but currently they are occupy the area. I mean, the developer, they have the large area, large unbuilt area, but some people need the land, but the land is still occupied by the big developer. And also, yes, we have concerning on how to transform social economy of the community in the urban household, in the slum. So that's why we are also promoting urban regeneration, how to transform people, social economic, basic infrastructure, housing, and everything. Yeah, maybe ADB will help us to promote urban regeneration, how the cities in Indonesia can be better. This is the.
Let me leave it at that for the time being, Pak Nurul. And of course, ADB is always very happy to support. And thank you also, particularly pointing out the challenges of related to extreme poverty. And actually, I want to make a jump to Ms. Anna in terms of your experiences in building resilience among communities, and what the challenges you've encountered, and as well the how you think there's opportunities there. Please go ahead. You're still muted, Anna.
Yes, thank you, Joris. I want to share 2 examples, actually, addressing particularly your question earlier about upscaling, how it is possible that community-led initiatives could be upscaled, for greater impact in terms of improving resilience for the urban poor. I'd like to share 2 examples, particularly in the areas of housing, community upgrading, and resettlement policy. I think the key factor here is that the community-led initiatives should be supported by responsive government policy. The example I will be sharing is that with the support of a shift in government housing and resettlement policy, community-led housing initiatives were that favored in-city resettlement as an alternative to off-city distant resettlement received more support, and therefore was upscaled. In 2011, the Philippine government established a housing fund, 50 billion peso housing fund, approximately $1 billion, which was intended to specifically support in-city multi-story housing for informal settlers who needed to be relocated from the banks of a major river and the tributaries flowing through various cities of Metro Manila. Part of the funds had been allocated to a program to be implemented by a government housing finance institution, which took the decision to support community organizing and a community-led planning process that came to be known as the People's Planning Approach in the affected communities. And the target was 100,000 families that needed to be relocated. And originally, the plan was to relocate them to off-city resettlement sites. But because of this shift, in using the funds made available for relocation, primarily for in-city in-city housing, the communities were given a chance to find land in the city, to purchase it with government financing, and to build 2 to 4-story residential buildings. The program was called the High Density Housing Program of the Social Housing Finance Corporation. And after the initial funds were used up, the agency continued with the program and called it the Vertical Community Mortgage Program, still emphasizing the community-driven process. In other words, the institutionalization of support through housing finance, support for community-led processes, was able to upscale this community-led process. For example, from 2013 to March of this year, so that's about 8 years, the program has assisted 43,000 informal settler families, many of whom would have been relocated to off-city, distant resettlement sites. And we know from experience that that is so disastrous for the livelihood aspect of the families that are already vulnerable. So previous to this, government resettlement policy has actually been narrowly, it has narrowly defined vulnerability to disasters, narrowly defined only in terms of housing, that their housing were not well built, that they were built on risky areas, hazardous areas. So that was how vulnerability to disasters was previously defined. But now we know that vulnerability really encompasses to a very important extent, economic access to economic opportunities and access to livelihood. So that was taken into account in the decision to really give government policy support to the people's planning process. So that was really a big step, in the right direction towards building resilience, I believe, that taken by the Philippine government at that time. I'd like to give a second example in which the upscaling was not as successful. And here we can see, how important really government policy support is. This example is the provision, this is a private initiative, more or less, which involved the provision of block grants to communities without formal tenure. For community upgrading projects, like the paving of roads, installation of legal power connections, the drainage infrastructure, water system, similar to what had been presented earlier by Marino, elevated water tank, retaining wall to prevent erosion, to serve mainly the community's needs and lower the cost of services provision. The grants were sourced through foreign development assistance, but channeled through a non-government organization. Such types of grants now, I feel, in this present context in the Philippines, could be provided by local governments, especially now with a new judicial ruling that grants more internal revenue resources to local governments. So what was crucial in this example is the capacity building process that the community underwent, supported by technical people from government housing agencies who helped design the infrastructure project. So even the communities without formal tenure, even in these communities that did not have tenure, the government invested in resilience enhancing infrastructure, which went a long way towards protecting people's investments in their housing, which will then be protected now against floods and landslides and lower the cost of basic services. So, but unfortunately, I think this initiative has not really been upscaled, and I would underscore mainly because, unlike the first example, the government has not given its vigorous support to a policy actually that it had already adopted after 2011, which is the National Informal Settlements Upgrading Strategy. So there is need really to keep pushing, to advocate for government support for well-intentioned policies that are already resilience-informed policies, but have not really gotten to be funded or financed or supported. So I just wanted to show in these two examples, one was successful in upscaling because of this decisive action by a government housing finance institution to really prioritize in-city resettlement. So that was very empowering and resilient building. But in another example, there has been lackluster or very token support for this national informal settlements upgrading strategy, which is really directed now at communities without formal tenure. They are in a different situation, but equally vulnerable as well. And it's important that their access to the city, as we know, is protected, because their livelihoods really depend a great deal on being in the city. And policies have to recognize that the urban poor on a daily basis are really already engaged in resilience building. Their livelihood strategies are very resilient. Different members of the family engage in different activities to support the household income, and they switch between different types of activities depending on the opportunities and the social connections that they have. So they really exercise a lot of resilience already on a daily basis. So the role of policy is really to protect already those strategies that the poor are doing, and not to hinder or impair them, which was what happened when government used to relocate. Well, the government is still relocating informal settlers to distant resettlement sites. So I think these contrasts would be able to underscore for us what are the challenges, but at the same time also the steps that need to be taken so that we can upscale community-led initiatives, of which there are already quite a number in the Philippines.
Yeah, thanks so much there, Anna. And I see that in the Q&A platform, there was actually a question about what changes in local government structure, processes and procedures are necessary to promote climate and disaster resilience. And I think you really pointed that. So thanks for this. I would like to go to the next poll for getting people excited about and involved in some of the questions. And the next poll is where to start, actually, because we've heard about many of the challenges. We heard some good examples. We heard about possible approaches. So where to start? And this is a question I often ask. If I would be a mayor of a local government anywhere here in Asia or the Pacific, that's quite a challenge. What is the first thing you could do? Yeah. So that's what the question is about. So I give the audience a few minutes, a few seconds actually to respond to that. So where to start? And if once we see some feedback, we can reflect on that. So I see provide resources to communities and make them decide how to use these. And also D gets feedback on partners with NGOs to engage with urban communities in designing and implementing resilience projects. But it seems that what's scoring quite well also is number one. Yeah, start with consulting communities and communicate their needs to local government. So being a bridge there. So as we are, thank you for that, everybody, for providing these inputs. As we are wrapping up this particular session, I would like all of our panelists to look at the various topics here, and in one or two sentences, really look at what are now the next steps we can focus on? What are the key messages from this particular session which you would like to convey? And can I, for that, maybe start with Tiffany? Thank you very much, Tiffany.
Thank you, Joris. So I think key messages for me would be that building urban resilience really does require this multi-dimensional approach, whether it's multi-stakeholder, multi-level, multi-sectoral. But yeah, it really is critical, and looking at both the city very widely and then its communities very specifically would be a way to integrate or enable integrated policy and planning and bring the city level and community level together.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. And then Panuro, from your side, what are your key takeaways for this?
Yeah, actually, Pa Yoris, I have architect's way how to combine top down and bottom up policy, how to meet in the middle, because sometimes how to respond like climate change, it should be affirmative action, because the community, they don't know what the big challenge of the climate change and disaster. Yeah, that's all, Pak Yoris. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. And then Anna, from your side.
Yes, for me, it would really be, we've had experience already connecting community-led action with national government policy, but I'd like to see more of community-led action really connecting with city governments and local governments, where I think there are really good opportunities to push for that. And because there's a lot of evidence already on the good outcomes coming from community-led actions, those can be collected and those can be presented in advocating for community-led action to be institutionalized in local government priorities, particularly on the issue of community upgrading. So I would push for more advocacy on top of the community actions already taking place.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then the institutional framework to accommodate that. And then from your side, Marino.
Yeah, I think we need to draw more attention and support for more inclusive and pro-poor and gender-responsive climate adaptation and resilience projects, because they are the most at risk from the impacts of climate change. The conversation is still ongoing and evolving. I think from the projects and initiatives that were discussed in this session, I think we can capture all these lessons and provide more proof of the benefits and value add of these initiatives to institutions and governments.
Thank you very much. I think that really sums up very nicely. I agree that where Tiffany said, look at the multidimensional approach, and for that you need data to bring everything together. Where Panuro said, make sure that the national government and the community come together through this bottom-up, top-down approach. Where Anna was focusing on the institutional question of making sure that community-led actions are really linked to local governments, and where Marino is indicating, we really need to review the lessons learned and communicate these, prove the benefits of community-led. I think this is a wonderful combination of recommendations and suggestions. And as such, I thank you very much, everybody, for your participation. I also thank all the people who raised questions in the platform. We've not been able to come back to many of these, although some of them we addressed in the sidelines. As I said, the presentations, so Anna, Tiffany, and Panuro, they all have their presentations shared with us, and they are available in the library for you to download. And on that note, I want to thank you very much, everybody, for your participation, and for the panelists to contribute their views. And I thank you for spending time with us this afternoon or morning or evening, whatever it is for you. On that note, thank you very much and have a good day. Thanks.
Thank you.